Chris Malt has been coming around now since 1870. So we've got a few harvests under our belt, so we kind of know what we're doing now. We have two maltings in Europe, one in Germany, where we bring over our German Pilsner malt from. We have one in Bydgoszcz in Poland, and we have 5 sites in the UK. In Scotland, we've got Port Gordon, which services most of our distillers. In Alloa, we have our Alloa maltings just north of Edinburgh, that services Scottish Provence barley. So for all you Scottish brewers out there and Scottish distillers out there, if you want barley that's grown in Scotland, that's malted in Scotland and bagged in Scotland, then Alloa is the perfect place for you. And then down in East Anglia, we have Great Ryborough, which is our headquarters and the biggest maltings, and then we have Ditchingham and Mistley. Along with that, we have grain storage in Membry, which is the one just west of London there. And we do grow a little bit of barley down that side as well, just to make sure we get barley from all around the country. What Chris will also have as well is micronized food products in Northallerton in Yorkshire that produce our flaked rice, flaked maize, flaked oats, and barley and torrefied wheat. So lots of nice things for you guys to play about with, and you don't need a cereal cooker for any of them. What is interesting, if you look at the map, is that all of the darker areas are to the east of England, and that is predominantly where all of the malting barley grades barley is grown within the UK. There's a little bit as well kind of down the M4 corridor, but pretty much all the maltsters and all the barley is grown to the east of England. And I think argumentatively wise, I think it's fair to say that the best barley in the world is grown in England and Scotland, in the UK, should we say. And I would go further afield to turn around and say the best of British is also grown in North Norfolk, where our maltings is Great Ryborough. The reasons why it's so good from the UK is partly down to the maritime climate, which basically means we get less extremes of temperatures. So we don't get particularly cold winters, and we don't get particularly cold hot summers, and there's quite a bit of moisture knocking around the place. And what makes it so good at Great Ryborough, it's kind of sticks out, and it's got the sea coming round a few sides, so you get a really nice cool moist air as well blowing in off the sea that just makes it perfect growing conditions. And the reason why it's all down the east coast as well is generally because it's light soil, which makes it perfect for growing low nitrogen malting barley. Now, it doesn't really matter around the soil and the soil and where it's grown if it isn't for the people that are growing it. They're massively important for what we do and what we're able to give you guys. Now, there are different maltsters have different ways of managing where they source their barley from. Some choose to own merchants, some choose to just go out and buy it on the spot through merchants. We've gone a slightly different route, and we've set up a growers group, which is called the ABC's Growers Group, and it's a joint venture between Adams and Howlings, Bannams, and Chris Malt. Great marketing, ABC, nice simple stuff. You can tell that it was just a couple of beers and done for that session. It's 15 years now since that growers group's been going, and we basically work with over 180 local farmers on 3-year rolling contracts to make sure that we've got the perfect supply and make sure we've got a consistent supply of barley into the maltings. If you've got a consistent supply of barley from happy farmers, then you're going to get great malt off the back of it. And what's interesting this year is we've contracted over 100,000 tonnes through that group in 2022. So it's grown every year since we've started it. Is there anything else you want to add on that, Colin?
No, nothing really. Just these partnerships are absolutely crucial to what we do, and we simply couldn't do it without those partners and without those local farmers. Yeah,
excellent. So we come on to a weather report basically, because the majority of the stuff, once it's in the field and the farmer's done his job, we're basically down to what the weather's going to deal us. So we'll go through, we'll start off with the different cereals that are available within the different markets. Now, I'm not going to even attempt this slide, so I'm going to let you do this one.
I put this one together. I
Yeah.
thought it would just be quite good to give a bit of context around the cereals market in the UK, actually. It was, it's a hugely important part of agriculture in the UK. And the three biggest cereal crops are on the left there. But you can see by a country mile that wheat and barley are the biggest by a line share. Almost pretty much 22 million tons of wheat and barley is grown in the UK every year. Wheat being the biggest crop, it's split pretty much evenly between milling and feed, and then with some of that also going into malting, a very small proportion to be fair. Barley, about 7 million tons of barley is grown in the UK. Some of that goes to export. Quite a lot of it goes to feed as well. But 1.86 million tons, roughly, it varies year by year, of barley goes into the malting industry. So it's a big user of barley. It's a premium product, malted barley over feed barley. Farmers really need to put in quite a lot of work to grow malting barley and justifiably achieve the premium that it commands. And so that 1.86 million tons of barley translates into about 1.5 million tons of malt. And as a market in the UK, I have to say we are unique. 50-50 is split between distilling and brewing. So the distilling market in Scotland is absolutely huge. It consumes about half of the malting barley crop. And then how that splits down, just to give you an idea between springs and winters. Mike's going to be talking a bit about spring and winter as we go through the crop. But the vast majority of what we're talking about in the UK is spring barley, and about 1 million tons of that goes into distilling, and about 700,000 tons of that goes into lager malt production, which leaves really only a couple of 100,000 tons of winter barley. But what's quite interesting about our setup at Crisp is that North Norfolk is especially well suited to the growing of winter barley. So when we were talking about things like Maris Otter, for example, that's a winter barley. So we do, as a company, actually purchase quite a lot of winter barley. And then also oilseed rape is the third sort of biggest cereal crop. It's not something that really affects us, but that would be tending to be going to vegetable oil and biofuels. The development of biofuels, though, in the UK is very interesting because it is starting to impact on the market. You also see wheat going into biofuels, for example. So as you see more crops going to biofuels, that might very well create some gaps in supply. Or it's certainly going to increase demand on that side, which can have a knock-on effect on this whole system. The reason I put in all these arrows is just to demonstrate that everything is interrelated. So when we see movements in the wheat market, when we see movements in the oilseed rape market, then we absolutely end up seeing movements in the barley market. And so malting barley does not sit in an isolated system. It doesn't sit in a bubble of its own. It's impacted by everything else. And of course, this is just the UK cereals market. When we expand that out to the globe, we realize that also everything is connected. As we'll talk about later on, the impact of big cereal producing countries like Russia and Ukraine, for example, have had a big bearing on the movements in the market this year. So that's just a bit of an overview of the UK cereals market.
Super. I'm glad that slide's out of the way. Okay, so we'll talk now a little bit about the growing cycle. As Colin's mentioned before, we've got winters and we've got springs. The main difference between them is that one is planted late autumn and harvested in July, which is the winter one, grows over the winter, and then the spring goes in February, March time, and then it's harvested August, September. maybe a bit later than that every now and then in Scotland, or is it generally done by September?
Generally done by sort of mid to, it can be as late September, but this year was a bit earlier.
So we're going to talk quite a lot about the winter barley because that's what we grow mainly for our craft brewing customers. As Colin says, North Norfolk area is particularly suited to growing winter barley. The farmers love it as a rotational crop, and it performs beautifully well within the brewery. It grows well, it malts well, it brews well. It's dead simple. So we talk a lot about the winters later on, but we'll also talk about springs as we start coming through. As it starts growing, we'll start basically as soon as the farmers can get in the fields, they'll start planting it. So come September time, after the harvest, the barley's going in the ground, and it goes through the first part of its growth, which is basically we'll sow it, the roots will start to develop, and then we'll start to see some stems coming out the ground. The warmer the temperature and the more moisture is knocking about at that stage, the quicker it's gonna go. Then the frosts come over, soil temperatures really cool down, and the plants will stop growing over the winter periods. As things start warming up again around March time, the plant carries on growing. You get the air coming through, you get some nice deep roots coming through, and then it starts to flower. And that's the next 3 months. And then through July and June and July, not July and July there, the grain really fills out, and hopefully some nice long sunshine days for the grain to fill out and then ripen, and then we can go on to harvest. Springs go through the exact same cycle, they just do it a lot quicker. They'll go in the ground in March and then rapidly go through each stage and then be harvested later on in July, August, September, sorry. So we'll start off with the weather in autumn last year. Just been having a quick look through this because I couldn't really remember off the top of my head what was happening in autumn last year, and I was a bit surprised to remember that it was really, really stormy. So there was quite a lot of wet weather. I think it was pretty dry as far as an average rainfall goes. But there's a lot of rain came down very, very quickly over a short period of days. But the main thing that was prominent is that it was warmer than normal. So coming through that first bit of emergence from the plants, we had some nice warm weather, and there was quite a lot of moisture knocking around. So the plants got off to a really good start. As that comes through winter, again, we stay quite warm. If you're looking down the East Coast, it's slightly cooler than the rest of England, but it's still above temperature, above average temperature. And the plant continued to grow really, really well. And again, there was some decent moisture levels there. This is the amount of rainfall on average. So anything that's white is bang on average. Anything that's brown is below average. Anything that's blue is above average. There's a reason why it's always wet in Wigan. And it was that another wet winter in Wigan there. So some comments there. There was some really good soil moisture and basically near perfect planting conditions. And what we was waiting for once this came through is showers in early April. I think I may put that a bit later on. Yeah, I've got them a little bit mixed up. Whoops. As we come into spring, then we come into spring weather. Again, the rainfall was actually below average, but we were still getting rain, and it became quite dry. But there was just certain points where the grain needed moisture levels, and it got them. It just kind of rained at the right time. We also had some really good root structure, so the dry days of the grain could still get down and take in a little bit of moisture.
It's quite kind of confusing actually looking at that weather graph, because you just look at the face of it, it looks like a very, very dry spring in the south and especially the east of England there. But as we sort of delved into the data around spring, you're seeing in that early April period, there was quite a few rain days. It didn't bring that average up. So that's why we're seeing the below average rainfall, but evidently there was enough moisture around, enough rainfall and enough, underlying moisture in the water course as well, for us to see some really good development throughout that spring period.
And that comes as well with the plants getting really good root structure. So again, they could take that water from the water course. And again, this is a comparison between last year and the year before. So 2022 on the left hand side, which you can see again, it's a warm year. And then on the left, through springtime last year, it was very cold. Was really worried back in 2021 because we were in drought that the grain was particularly going to struggle, but because the plant structure was because the temperature was so cold, the plant didn't really want to grow. Whereas this year there's a lot of warmer temperatures knocking about and the plant wants to grow. So luckily we got that bit of moisture at the right time. And then coming into summer, we all remember summer. We had some really, really nice summer days. And that's the kind of the heat wave is the things that people remember. So you can see again, it's of the average rainfall, we're below average all over the country, but we're still getting some rainy days. And that's the important part. We're still starting to see some moisture coming through. Mm-hmm. But it's really hot as well. So the plant can really advance and start to really get some good grain fill going through. This is when this is when you want the warmth and the sunshine to come through so the plant can fully develop.
There were certainly some concerns about that heat and that dryness throughout the summer period. But it's really interesting just what you were saying earlier on, Mike, about the kind of geography of the Norfolk area. I would argue actually probably the east coast of Scotland as well, where you've got these sort of maritime areas very, very close to the water. The Moray Firth is a prime example, in parts of Aberdeenshire as well, where you're surrounded by that water. You're getting that moist air coming in off the sea. So despite a lack of rainfall, you're still picking up moisture across the crops. The other big difference there is that moist air has a cooling effect. So yes, we saw some very, very high temperatures. I mean, it was a record temperature year this year in the UK. It was the highest recorded temperature was in Lincolnshire of 40.5 degrees C. But there's a big difference between the temperatures that you get sort of on the coast and then when you come, say, 50 miles inland. The difference between, say, Norfolk and Cambridgeshire, can be really quite a big difference in those kind of those average temperatures. So again, the geography really helping us out when it came to sort of mitigating the worst impact of that summer heat.
At this time as well, the winters were the winters in the field looked really, really nice. You could see that in the field that they looked like it was going to be a good crop, but it was more worried about the springs, if I remember as well, around this time. It was the springs that was particularly wanted a little bit of a rain dance for. And they actually got it. So we managed to get the rain again in the right places, but you can see as well this we just mentioned sunshine as well for really developing bold grains. And you can see on average across the whole of the UK, we've got some really nice sunshine, sunny weather. So with all of that, the harvest started around 7 to 10 days earlier than usual, which was a big relief to everyone, I think. And the good weather continued as well, which meant that basically all of the harvest was completed by the end of July. So
in England,
in England, yes. Scotland was still in pretty early in Scotland as well, wasn't it?
It was in early, yeah. I mean, essentially everything was roughly, like you say, like about 2 weeks earlier than usual. And that was across the whole of the UK. It's the earliest barley harvest that we've ever had. You were saying that was quite a good thing. Maybe not for our intake, but because it meant
No,
that grain needed to be cleared very, very quickly. But we got it done, and yeah, it was pretty remarkable actually. There were certainly concerns from farmers around, crops potentially going on fire.
which we saw in some areas as well in the southeast. There was some quite bad fires, and combines not particularly enjoying the 40-degree heat as well.
That's right. Yeah. So, people having to cut late into the evening as the temperature started to come down, and also grain, instead of being necessarily needing to be dried, grain actually needing to be cooled as it went into store. Sometimes just so that heat wasn't sitting in that grain, which can affect quality in a really big way if you've got hot grain in the store. So all of these sorts of new challenges, I think, related with this particularly warm summer. And of course, who knows what future summers are going to be like, but we're certainly seeing some impact and certainly seeing some changes within the climate. Back in the 60s, harvest would have been probably a month later than what it is right now. So there's been a big shift in the agricultural calendar over the past 60 years for sure.
I think it's interesting as well, looking at the weather over the last 3 years. It's been completely different every single year.
Every year, yeah.
Whereas 2020, we went through the heat wave early on, April through to May, I think. We got the heat wave there and no showers, and then last year is really, really cold and then a bit wet later on, and then this year's been, I don't know if it's ideal, but it seems to have done a good job.
Indeed. Well, yeah.
I can't say ideal at this time, no. So what's that actually given us then? So going off the AHDB data, we've pulled this off for the last 3 years. So this is all of the winter barley that's grown across the UK. So that's feeds and malting quality barley, just to kind of show you the differences throughout the year. So we can see from the moisture content, from what we've just been speaking about, you can see this year is lower than normal. So needing to keep an eye on the heat, as Colin said, but also still did need a little bit of drying going on. Specific weight of the grain. It's
really a measure of the density of the grain. Just
exactly.
How much, so how much heft you get in a certain volume of grain.
So if you had grains from this year, a number of grains from this year, and you counted that same number of grains against another year, you'd get a difference in weight. So you can see this year the gravity is really up; it's quite high. So, and the grains look quite bold. So we're quite hopeful around what starch quantity we may get out of there. You can see that the nitrogen levels are slightly up as well on last year, as an average of 0.05 up, which is nice. Last year was just a little bit too low. Started causing a few problems for a few people because of that. Screenings through the 2.25 mil. So one of the ways that we assess the quality of barley is by sieving it, basically. So we take away anything that passes by a 2.25 mil, and then we also put it through a 2.5 mil, and we want to see what's retained. And basically, good numbers of the retained through 2.5 basically make sure that we can see what kind of grain size we've got, and also helps us to see how homogeneous it is and the size difference. So quite low levels of screenings through 2.25, a little bit lower than last year, and higher levels retained through the 2.5 millimeter, which kind of backs up the specific weight, although I believe they're not actually related through growing. But from the screenings values on the 2.5, we can see we've got bigger grain sizes than last year.
And less skinny corns as well than we had last year.
Yes, less skinny corns. So which is basically what the 2.25 one is. They're the skinny ones. So that was the average. This is what we have got.
And that was the average across the whole of the UK.
That's the average across the whole of the UK. And this is what we have on average across basically what's coming on average into Great Rydberry. So Best Sale and Extra Pale, which uses Flagger as the variety, an average nitrogen of 1.45%, which is up from 1.39 last year. I think there's some comparisons coming up. The screenings through the 2.25 mil is 2%, and the screenings retained by the 2.5 mil a massive 95.9. So you can see the difference as well with what we've got coming into Great Rydberg compared to the rest of the UK. Really, they look very, very impressive, those figures. Marisotta, an older variety, still going strong. Good nitrogen levels of 1.52, again, slightly up on last year. 2% through the 2.25 mil screen, so not low levels of skinny grains. And 91.5% through the 2.5 is really, really good for Marisotta. It is a smaller grain. It's an older grain. That's fantastic. I think the spec that we want through the maltings is 80%. So we're well above anything that we would reject within that. So they're looking very, very good.
It's amazing to see that actually that performance out of Marisotta, given that it's been going for what 60 odd years, something like that. It's really impressive how it continues to return a really, really decent crop. And it's great that people all over the world still support that variety for its flavor. And it's it's something that we've supported and will continue to support for a long time.
And one of the fun memories from this year as well was Marisotta in the field. It looked sensational. You know, being able to do the kind of gladiator walk through the fields of Marisotta through. Oh,
you can tell you've been in maltings now for a few years.
Just like my highlights walking through a field these days.
Hey.
Okay, so yeah, we've got some comparisons of Marisotta between last year and this year. So we can see the nitrogens on average are up by 0.07, 8.08%. You've also got a lot less screenings through the 2.25, and again, you can see it's going to be a much bigger grain size. So that extra bit of nitrogen should help out with the bigger grain size, but it's looking like a fantastic crop, Marisotta this year. Last year was pretty good. Anyway, this year is looking superb. As barley, may add. Get told off otherwise. The Crisp Extra Pale and Best Ale. So last year had an average nitrogen on intake of 139. You do lose about 0.05 through the malting process, and there was sometimes through last year where it was really, really a little bit too low of where you want it to be. Unfortunately, that was a part of the growing season. There's not too much you can do about it. You can see as well there was quite a few skinny corns going through with a 2.25 mil screen, and it wasn't the biggest of grains either. 84.5. It was a decent enough crop, but it wasn't rewriting history in any way. This year you can see the difference. We're back in that perfect sweet spot of 145 nitrogen. Anything around between 0.05 between 1.5 is probably as good as what you'll get anywhere. Screenings, again, a lot less. We spoke about them, and then just big grain sizes. So hopeful of some really good extracts this year. And then the Scottish crop. That's the Scottish crop. I've not heard anything bad from any of the brewers that have used.
It's pretty remarkable. They're almost identical to last year. So this will be
astonishing.
This is going to be our spring variety, Laureate, which is the dominant spring variety across the whole of the UK. For the distillers that are watching the webinar today, this is the kind of this pretty much mirrors what you would be seeing in pot still. So yeah, basically no change to last year. That's pretty remarkable.
Consistency there is crazy. Yeah,
but some really I mean, at intake there were some really low nitrogens coming through as well. Some round about the 1.3. So given where the kind of boldness is at with that screening value there, and where the nitrogen's at, then fingers crossed for some really nice spirit yields. As Mike has already said, these are just barley results at this time. We don't know for another couple of months until we start malting what the malting results are going to be. But certainly in the face of it, that looks really decent for any of our brewers taking malt out of Alloa for brewing, using the Scottish Best Ale and Extra Pale, and indeed for our pot still customers across the whole of Scotland.
Okay, thank you. So what does all of that mean to the brewer? I think it's important to just take a step back sometimes and remember how much malt adds to the quality of beer in general. Obviously the milling has to be right for us to get the extracts that we want. In the mash mixer, we need the enzyme potential, we want the extract, we need to maintain husk through the mill so we can lauter properly and get nice bright worts coming through. As it goes into the kettle again, we don't want too much nitrogen in there, so we're getting nice protein coagulation through the kettle. Fermenting vessel, we want the right number of fan within there. We need to make sure we've got the enzymes and got it right in the mash mixer to make sure we've got good yeast growth, and we're going to get that attenuation. Into maturation tank, you again, protein levels within there, filtration, beta glucan levels, again, taking out protein. And then going into final pack, the color, the flavor, it's a big part of what beer's all about. So as we come through, this is the corn size, isn't it? I can't see that one yet. So this is the corn size, and as you can see from the slides we've just done, it varies year on year, and it's going to be quite a big change from last year to this year, just for milling. So the grains we're expecting to be slightly larger than last year, so we're going to have to keep a close eye on the mill and make sure that it's probably going to need to be pulled out a little bit. Myself, Stuart, we're knocking about everywhere. You can give us a call and we can help you re-optimize your mill. We don't mind coming to site and doing that with you. We can give you advice of what we're setting our mills at, the guys at the maltings, make sure that they're all over the quality that's coming off the mill on every single run that comes through it, and we can pass that guidance on to you guys. I would say that this year at the minute in time, the biggest change is just going to be through the mill, just on that grain size coming through.
Nitrogen
levels, they're higher than last year, but given that the grain size is also higher, got a feeling that they're going to kind of act the same. So I don't think there's going to be too much difference between the crops of the 2021 crop and the 2022 crop, between what you're doing around the mash tun. We'll know more once we malt it. As I said, this is just trying to look at some barley figures and see where we're going. But it's not going to be the step change that we saw coming from the 2020 crop onto the 2021, where we needed to make lots of changes to the brewing process to be able to bring yourselves back to the attenuations and fermentation performance that you're used to. The guys that are after nice bright beer, I think, are going to be happy still. And then the guys that are after the more hazy stuff, might be another year where it's not quite what you like. Give us a ring, and if that's the case, if you want a little bit of help around adding some chip malts, some torrefieds, barley, or more wheat, oats to your grist, we can give you some advice on how you can keep that grain, how you can get your haze as stable as possible. And that's, I don't think there's going to be too much more around. I don't think it's going to be the massive shift that we saw between last year. I think it should be a nice continuous flow. Any comments, Colin?
No, and I think you've caveated it already. I think we do want to see, obviously, the malting results coming through, but just that little bit extra nitrogen, perhaps Maybe we'll see a little bit more enzyme, do you think? Something maybe a little bit more DP potentially coming through?
It's possible. I think a lot of, I'm not the maltster, but I think a lot of the enzyme activity as well created in that first 3-4 months of in the soil as well.
Okay.
So we're going that fast. Hopefully, we've got a little bit more enzyme activity through growing, because I think a lot of it's.
We'll see that. Yeah, like you say, we'll see that coming through as we change over that crop year, and the crop year change will be communicated through our certificates of analysis. But if you're ever in any doubt as to what crop you're on, then give us a shout. Looking for that changeover from 21 crop to 22.
Yeah, and as you get that new C of A coming through again, if you want to walk through any of the analysis, compare it to last year, then we can do that, and we'll be able to help you make any changes. Okay, so the crop pricing. So it's pretty. I'm quite excited around what the quality is going to bring. I think it's looking like quite a nice year. But we all know what's going on around the world as far as pricing goes. It's not limited to, you can look at anything around you, you can see what's happening. So we'll start off first by looking at wheat futures. As Colin said before, wheat's hugely important, even to barley. It's on a global market, and basically we have to convince farmers to grow malting barley over wheat. The farmer can just go out and plant wheat in his fields, leave it, not do anything with it, not put any intention into it until harvest it, and he knows he'll get the wheat futures price. Malting barley, they've got to be a lot more careful with it. It trades at a premium because of that, and he's got to meet a malting barley spec. So it trades, we work with this farmers groups that we get, we set our base prices following the wheat futures with a premium. So this is why we talk about wheat futures, because it matters to what's going on, and everything around the world matters. Although we're growing it in the UK, and we're a net exporter, what happens around the world matters within the commodities market. So you can see coming through, harvest last year was trading at around 170 on the blue line, which is the UK wheat futures. And you can see it starting to creep up. As we go through November and December, it's crept up a little bit. And that's kind of off there's a few storms come through. The weather's not been great. There's a little bit of people starting to worry around, is there enough wheat in the world? I think that the American weather was particularly poor at that time as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to remember. And if you look back on last year's webinar and last year's crop report, last winter, we were coming out of a harvest which had been pretty poor in many parts of the Northern Hemisphere. There were some pretty poor harvests in some of the European countries. UK got away with it in terms of the overall supply, but North America, US and Canada was pretty dire. Canada was about half of what they would usually put out. That was coming out of a season where stocks were already depleted. China and Australia had been in quite a big trade war, and so China had been drawing malting barley and other cereals from France. So we're kind of faced with that situation. Prices were already up, and then as you come through the winter, remember, we're starting to get into those energy market jitters already. We're starting to have some supply issues last winter from Russia, and this is well before the conflict starts. When you get energy jitters, you get concerns around the cost of production of fertilizer, for example. And so Mike's already mentioned some of the weather impacts, but we're starting to see some energy impacts within the grain market itself. Energy and grain are also interrelated. So that's why we start to see some prices sort of starting to come up through November and December. And then we come into the new year.
Yep. And then we get through to March, and then that is when we see the war in Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia, I think, accountable for 30% of the whole wheat grown throughout the year. throughout the world, and then you can just see it skyrocket then as it gets a little bit deeper and a little bit worse, and it's going to be quite a prolonged war in the Ukraine. And then along with that, there's concerns around drought through France, and also concern around the crop from the USA. So basically, people in the market's been hugely worried that there is not enough grain or wheat knocking around to feed the world, and that this is where the price is really spiked. And then we get to June time, you can start to see them coming down a bit. That started off the back of 2 boats being released from the Ukraine as they got to an agreement that they was going to start exporting grain again. They also figured out that the farmers had done a fantastic job in the Ukraine of actually getting the harvest done, and also planting. I think it was they managed to plant around 60-70% of what they would normally plant, which is astonishing. So you could see that the confidence was starting to come back to the market, and then it drops all the way through, and through harvest as well. It continues to drop. So harvest started end of June, beginning of July time, and you can see it continuing to fall as harvest comes in again, as people start to think, oh, it's going to be quite a good crop. The markets fell, but they never came back to where we started at. So you can still see, you know, what are they there, hundreds, nearly £100 above, £120 above.
Yeah.
Where
so there's still that risk essentially built into the market, and you can see things starting to climb away again from sort of August onwards, as you know, there are those, you know, concerns that are still there. The Ukraine grain corridor deal, I think, only lasts for another month or so, and so there are certainly concerns as to whether that's going to continue, whether the Ukraine harvest is going to be able to be exported from the likes of Odessa. So there's definite concerns around there. You know, if you look at that previous graph there, Mike, that UK wheat future up almost around about £340, something like that. It's an all-time high. It's never been up at that level before. And so, you know, we thought that last year we were up at the top of the market when it came to the global grain pricing, but really this year was just unprecedented. It feels like a word that we're using a lot these days, but that is an unfortunate reality of the geopolitics at this time that drove that market that far north. Luckily, it did ease off, or else we could have seen harvest barley pricing even higher than what we've landed at already for this year.
It's nearly used as much as you're on mute.
Unprecedented. Yeah.
And as Colin says, you can start to see it rising again. I think that's just about in line again with when Nord Stream 1 was shut off for maintenance. So yeah, where we're at now, it would have. We'll come on to I think there's a graph in a minute in time that shows you what's happened over the past few years. But normally you'd kind of expect these to carry on coming down again, but they've not. They're heading back up. There you go. So this is basically all the wheat futures over since August 05, where it looks like it was 50 quid a ton. And you can see the spikes, and the spikes through the good old days was normally around when it was a poor harvest. So you'd get paid more for your malt, and you get a pretty poor results off the back of it. So there's 07, 08 was 1, 11 and 12 was bad years because of I think that was weather again. 18 was weather. It was quite a bad growing year, 18. I remember that crop quite well. And then 21 was the start of COVID basically as well, or off the back of COVID. And then you can just see where the prices come in. So yeah, it's unprecedented is the right word for that. They were coming down nicely, and then they've shot back up again. No. So the major part of pricing over the years has always been that grain price. So that's what we're buying it from the farmers at. And it's important to remember off the back of this one, actually, which we've not mentioned, is that we buy all of our barley at harvest. So we're not now, anything that happens now from now until next August doesn't really affect the prices, because we've already bought everything and we've put it in store. So yeah, barley, the shift in barley over the years used to be the major different reason why malted barley price changed. But we've got the energy factor this year. When I did last year's presentation of this one, we saw these spikes coming in, and this was on a completely different scale. I think the scale went up to 400 at that stage, and now I can't. I've got something in the way there that I can't see it, but I think it goes up to 600 or 700 now. So you can see, again, energy is quite stable throughout the summer, and then suddenly we start getting the worries around what's going on with supply, and then boom, as soon as Nord Stream 1 gets shut off, everything shoots back up again. It's come down, but it's not come all the way back down. You can all see what's happening with at home and in your own breweries and businesses. You can see that you can see what's happening with energy there. We're affected, and we use a lot of energy. We use a lot of electric from heating through the specialist malt plant, all the gears through germination, fans, gears shifting around the rakes through germination, the fans, the conveyors, but the biggest use is by far is gas for drying. So yeah, hugely affected by what's happening in the energy market. Anything to add, Colin?
No, I don't think so. It's a big part of the pricing conundrum this year for sure. Whereas, like you say, in previous years, it was a very small adjustment year to year, the energy piece, but it's just a big chunk of change this year for sure.
We are quite an energy efficient site as far as what certain parts of the plants can do. We've got one particular site that recirculates energy between two kilns. We generate our own electricity on site, so we are quite energy efficient. As some of the directors remind us, they remember the 70s. The plant was there in the 70s, and they remember the shortages. And everything that's been in since has been designed to be as energy efficient as possible. But unfortunately, there's not been a massive step forward in technology that's made it use particularly less gas. So I think that covers everything.